The vultures circled overhead, their black wings stark against the cloudless blue sky as Willa Thompson opened her swollen eyes, her throat so dry she couldn't even scream. Ropes cut into her wrists and ankles, binding her to the desert floor as the merciless Arizona sun beat down upon her exposed skin. Death seemed certain until a silhouette appeared on the horizon, the unmistakable form of a man on horseback approaching through the shimmering heat. Xander Grayson wiped the sweat from his brow as he guided his horse across the barren landscape. 3 days into his journey from Prescott to Tucson, he'd seen nothing but sand, cactus, and the occasional lizard scuttling across his path. This stretch of Arizona territory was particularly unforgiving in the summer of 1878, and he'd been regretting his decision to take the shortcut through the desert rather than following the safer, more populated route. Something in the distance caught his attention, something that didn't belong in this desolate place. He squinted against the harsh sunlight, then urged his horse forward with renewed urgency. As he drew closer, the shape became clearer, a human form lying motionless on the ground. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured to his stallion as they approached. The vultures scattered at their arrival, reluctantly giving up their anticipated feast. Xander dismounted, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the hard, packed earth. What he found made his blood run cold. A woman lay bound spread eagle on the ground, her once fine dress torn and filthy, her skin blistered from sun exposure. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and dust, but even in such a state, he could tell she was young, perhaps 25 or so, and miraculously she was still breathing. "Madam, can you hear me?" Xander knelt beside her, pulling his knife from his belt to cut the ropes that held her. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Don't worry, I'm going to help you." He worked quickly, slicing through the coarse rope that had worn her wrists raw. After freeing her limbs, he gently lifted her head and brought his canteen to her cracked lips. "Small sips now," he cautioned, though she barely seemed conscious enough to hear him. Water trickled down her chin as she instinctively swallowed what she could. After a moment, her eyes opened fully, startlingly green against her sunburned face. "Who?" She tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than a rasp. "Name's Xander Grayson," he said, using his bandana to shield her face from the sun. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. Can you tell me your name?" She licked her lips, struggling to form words. "Willa," she finally managed. "Willa Thompson. Miss Thompson, whoever did this to you is long gone, but I need to get you to town before nightfall. The temperature drops fast out here." He hesitated, then added, "I'm going to lift you onto my horse. I'll try not to hurt you." Willa nodded weakly, and Xander gathered her into his arms as gently as possible. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel the heat radiating from her sunburned skin. He settled her onto Thunder's back, then mounted behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. "There's a trading post about 10 miles south of here," he told her, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him anymore. She had slumped against his chest, her breathing shallow. "You're going to be all right, Miss Thompson. Just hold on." As they rode, Xander's mind raced with questions. Who would leave a woman to die such a horrible death? Bandits, Apaches, a personal enemy. The desert was an unforgiving place, but humans could be far crueler than nature. Willa drifted in and out of consciousness as they traveled. The rhythmic motion of the horse and the solid presence of the man behind her were the only things anchoring her to reality. Images flashed through her mind: men in masks, rough hands dragging her from a stagecoach, accusations being hurled at her. Then darkness and pain as they left her to die. By the time they reached the trading post, little more than a weathered wooden building with a small stable attached, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert. A man with a gray beard stepped out onto the porch, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. "State your business," he called out, then lowered the gun slightly as he took in the sight of Willa slumped against Xander. "What happened to her?" "Found her tied up in the desert about 10 miles north," Xander explained as he carefully dismounted, then lifted Willa down. "She needs water, food, and a doctor if there's one to be found." The man nodded grimly. "No doctor for 50 miles, but my wife knows a thing or two about healing. Name's Herbert Wilson. Bring her inside." The interior of the trading post was blessedly cool and dim after the bright desert sun. A woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun appeared from a back room, her expression softening at the sight of Willa. "Martha, this lady needs help," Herbert said. "Found her tied up in the desert." Martha Wilson's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Bring her back here," she directed, leading the way to a small bedroom off the main trading area. "You can put her on the bed, then wait outside while I tend to her." Xander laid Willa on the simple bed, reluctant to leave her even in Martha's capable hands. "She said her name is Willa Thompson." "That mean anything to you folks?" The Wilsons exchanged a glance that told Xander they recognized the name, but Herbert merely shook his head. "You wait outside, young man. Martha will call if she needs anything." Reluctantly, Xander retreated to the main room of the trading post. Herbert poured him a cup of coffee and gestured to a rough wooden chair near the counter. "You did a good thing bringing her here," the older man said, his voice low. "Not everyone would have stopped." Xander's mouth twisted into a grimace. "What kind of man wouldn't stop for someone in need?" "The kind that's all too common in these parts," Herbert replied, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "You passing through or got business in these parts?" "On my way to Tucson," Xander said, sipping the strong coffee gratefully. "Got a job waiting with the Arizona Rangers." He didn't mention that the job represented a last chance for him, a way to put his troubled past behind him and start fresh. Herbert nodded approvingly. "Rangers do good work. Lord knows we need more law in this territory." He hesitated, then lowered his voice further. "That girl in there, I think she might be William Thompson's daughter from Phoenix. Rich man, owns half the banks in the territory. If it's her, there's been talk." Xander raised an eyebrow. "What kind of talk?" Before Herbert could answer, Martha emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "She'll live," she announced. "Dehydrated something terrible, and those burns will pain her for a while, but she's young and strong." She fixed Xander with a stern look. "She's asking for you." Xander rose, setting aside his coffee cup. "Thank you, madam," Martha sniffed. "Don't thank me yet. If trouble follows that girl here, you'll be the one dealing with it." Willa was sitting up in bed when Xander entered the small room, her face and arms glistening with some kind of salve. Martha had apparently helped her change into a clean nightgown, and her dark hair had been brushed and braided. Despite her ordeal, she looked remarkably composed. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice still raspy but stronger than before. "Mrs. Wilson says I have you to thank for my life." Xander removed his hat, suddenly aware of how dusty and travel-worn he must appear. "Anyone would have done the same, Miss Thompson." "No," she said with surprising firmness. "They wouldn't have. Please sit. I owe you an explanation." He hesitated, then took a seat in the wooden chair beside the bed. "You don't owe me anything, madam, but I admit I'm curious how you ended up in such a state." Willa's green eyes clouded with pain, but she straightened her shoulders. "I was traveling on the Phoenix stagecoach, headed for my aunt's home in Tucson. 3 men stopped the coach about 40 miles north of here. They killed the driver." She paused, swallowing hard. "They were waiting for me specifically. They said my father would pay for what he'd done." "And what has your father done?" Xander asked carefully. My father is a banker, Willa said, looking down at her bandaged wrists. Last month he foreclosed on several ranches during the drought. One of the ranchers, a man named Everett Davis, killed himself rather than face the shame. Her voice faltered. The men who took me said they were Davis's brothers. They wanted my father to suffer like they had suffered. Xander's jaw tightened. So they left you to die in the desert. They said they sent a message to my father telling him where to find my body, Willa confirmed, a single tear tracking down her cheek. They wanted him to be too late. Well, they'll be disappointed, Xander said grimly. Miss Thompson, I'm headed to Tucson myself. Once you're well enough to travel, I'd be honored to escort you the rest of the way to your aunt's home. Willa studied him, her expression unreadable. Why would you do that? You've already saved my life. You owe me nothing. Those men might come back when they realize their plan failed, Xander pointed out. And as it happens, I'm on my way to join the Arizona Rangers. Bringing criminals to justice is about to become my job. A ghost of a smile touched Willa's lips. A ranger. My father would say that's hardly a respectable profession for a man of quality. Xander couldn't help but smile back. Then it's fortunate I've never claimed to be a man of quality. I think you're selling yourself short, Mr. Grayson. Willa's eyes drooped with exhaustion, but she fought to keep them open. I accept your offer of escort, but only if you'll call me Willa. After saving someone's life, Miss Thompson seems overly formal. Then you must call me Xander, he replied, rising from the chair. Rest now, Willa. We can talk more tomorrow. He left her to sleep and found the Wilsons waiting for him in the main room, their expressions grave. She told you about the Davis brothers? Herbert asked without preamble. Xander nodded. You know them. Everyone around these parts knows the Davis boys, Martha said, her voice tight with disapproval. Mean as rattlesnakes, the lot of them. Everett was the decent one. God rest his soul. If they find out she's alive, they'll come for her again, Herbert added. And likely kill anyone who stands in their way. Xander's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. Then we'd best make sure they don't find out until she's safely in Tucson with her family. Martha gave him a shrewd look. And what's your stake in this, young man? Rangers don't usually get involved in personal vendettas. I'm not a ranger yet, Xander reminded her. Right now, I'm just a man who can't abide seeing someone helpless left to die. He didn't add that he knew all too well what it was like to be at the mercy of those stronger than himself. Herbert seemed satisfied with this answer. You and the girl can stay here until she's fit to travel. Might be a few days before she has the strength for the journey to Tucson. I appreciate that, Xander said. I can pay you for the room and board. Martha waved a dismissive hand. We'll discuss payment later. For now, you look like you could use some food and rest yourself. Xander couldn't argue with that assessment. After a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, he settled into a bedroll near the fireplace in the main room of the trading post. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him as he thought about the woman in the back room and the men who had tried to kill her. The Davis brothers, if they were indeed responsible, wouldn't take kindly to having their vengeance thwarted. And Xander knew enough about men like that to recognize they wouldn't give up easily. His journey to Tucson had just become considerably more complicated, but as he finally drifted off to sleep, he couldn't bring himself to regret the decision to help Willa Thompson. Morning arrived with the harsh brilliance unique to the desert, sunlight streaming through the small windows of the trading post. Xander rose before the Wilsons, quietly making coffee and stepping outside to check on Thunder. The horse seemed no worse for their hard ride the previous day, contentedly munching on hay in the small corral behind the building. You're up early, came a voice from behind him. Xander turned to find Willa standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame for support. She wore a simple calico dress that must have belonged to Martha Wilson. It hung loosely on her slender frame. Her face was still red and peeling from sunburn, but her eyes were clear and alert. "Should you be up?" he asked, moving toward her with concern. "Mrs. Wilson said short walks would help me regain my strength," Willa replied, taking a careful step onto the porch. "Though I admit I feel as weak as a newborn foal." Xander offered his arm, which she accepted gratefully. "Let's sit here in the shade for a bit," he suggested, guiding her to a bench against the wall of the trading post. "The air is still cool at this hour." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the sun climb higher above the desert horizon. Willa was the first to speak. "Tell me about yourself, Xander. What brings a man like you to the Arizona territory?" Xander contemplated how much to share. His past wasn't something he discussed readily, but something about Willa made him want to be honest with her. "I grew up in Missouri," he began. "My father was a farmer, raised me and my sister after our mother died of influenza. When the war came, he joined up with the Union. Never came home." He paused, the memories still painful despite the passing years. "I was 16, tried to keep the farm going, but it was too much. We lost it to taxes." Willa's expression softened with sympathy. "What happened then?" "My sister married a shopkeeper in St. Louis. I drifted west, worked as a ranch hand, tried my hand at mining, did some scouting for the army." He shrugged, deliberately vague about the darker periods of his life. "Eventually heard the Rangers were recruiting men who know the territory. Seemed like a chance to do something worthwhile." "And you've never married?" Willa asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Forgive me, that's far too personal a question." Xander smiled faintly. "No need for forgiveness, and no, I've never married. A drifter's life doesn't lend itself to settling down." He turned the conversation back to her. "What about you? Were you raised in Phoenix?" "Yes, born and raised," Willa confirmed. "My mother died when I was 12. It's been just my father and me since then." A shadow crossed her face. "He's a difficult man, ambitious, determined. The kind of man who built a fortune from nothing, and who expects nothing less than perfection from himself and others." "Including his daughter," Xander guessed. Willa nodded, absently rubbing her wrist where the rope burns were still visible. "Especially his daughter. He had my life all planned out, the right schools, the right friends, eventually the right husband." She looked away. "That's partly why I was going to my aunt's. Father arranged a marriage for me to the son of his business partner. I needed time to think." "And now," Xander asked, "will you still go through with this arranged marriage?" "I don't know," Willa admitted, meeting his gaze directly. "Nearly dying changes one's perspective. I'm not sure I can go back to being the dutiful daughter my father expects." Their conversation was interrupted by Herbert Wilson stepping onto the porch, his shotgun cradled in his arms. "Riders coming," he announced tersely. "3 of them from the north." Xander stood immediately, his hand going to his pistol. "The Davis brothers." "Can't tell yet," Herbert replied, his eyes fixed on the distant dust cloud. "But not many folks come this way without purpose." "Get inside," Xander told Willa, helping her to her feet. "Stay in the back room until we know who they are." For once, Willa didn't argue, allowing Martha to usher her into the trading post. Xander joined Herbert at the edge of the porch, both men watching as the riders drew closer. "If it is the Davis boys, they're likely to shoot first and talk later," Herbert warned. "They've got a reputation for being quick-tempered." "I've dealt with their kind before," Xander replied grimly. His past had given him plenty of experience with violent men. As the riders came into clear view, Herbert's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Not the Davis brothers," he said. "That's Sheriff Hayes from Prescott and a couple of his deputies." Xander didn't holster his weapon just yet. Law enforcement didn't always mean safety, especially in territories where badges could be bought. The three riders pulled up in front of the trading post, dust billowing around them. The man in the center, a weathered individual with a gray mustache and the star of a sheriff pinned to his vest, nodded in greeting. "Herbert," he acknowledged. "Been a while." "Sheriff Hayes," Herbert replied cautiously. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Looking for a woman," Hayes said, his gaze shifting to Xander. "Young lady named Willa Thompson. Stagecoach she was on got hit 2 days ago. Driver killed, she was taken." He paused. "Her father's offering a substantial reward for her safe return." Xander and Herbert exchanged glances. "What do you know about who took her?" Xander asked. Hayes studied him with narrowed eyes. "Who's asking?" "Name's Xander Grayson," he replied. "On my way to join the Rangers in Tucson." "Rangers, huh?" Hayes didn't look impressed. "Well, Grayson, word is the Davis brothers are responsible. Their ranch was foreclosed on by Thompson's bank last month, and Everett Davis put a bullet in his head over it. His brothers swore revenge." "Seems you know a lot about it," Xander observed, not bothering to hide his suspicion. Hayes's expression hardened. "It's my job to know." "Now, you didn't answer my question. Seen any sign of the Thompson girl?" Before either man could respond, the door of the trading post opened, and Willa stepped onto the porch, ignoring Martha's attempts to hold her back. "I'm Willa Thompson," she announced, her chin raised despite her obvious weakness. "And I'd like to know how you intend to bring my kidnappers to justice, Sheriff." Hayes seemed momentarily taken aback by her appearance. His gaze traveled from her sunburned face to her bandaged wrists, then back to her determined expression. "Miss Thompson," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "your father will be mighty relieved to hear you're alive. We've been searching since we got word of the attack." "My father sent you?" Willa asked, a note of surprise in her voice. "Offered a $1,000 reward for your safe return," Hayes confirmed. "Got every lawman in the territory looking for you." He glanced at Xander. "Seems someone got to you first." "Mr. Grayson saved my life," Willa said firmly. "The Davis brothers left me tied up in the desert to die." One of the deputies let out a low whistle. "Cold-blooded, even for the Davis boys." "We'll escort you back to Phoenix, Miss Thompson," Hayes said. "Your father's waiting." Willa stiffened. "I was traveling to Tucson to visit my aunt, Sheriff. That remains my destination." Hayes frowned. "Your father was quite insistent." "My father doesn't dictate my movements," Willa interrupted, her voice surprisingly steady. "I am a grown woman, and I will continue to Tucson as planned. Mr. Grayson has already offered to escort me." The sheriff looked from Willa to Xander, clearly displeased. "Thompson won't like that." "Then Mr. Thompson is welcome to express his displeasure to me personally when I arrive in Tucson," Xander said mildly. "In the meantime, shouldn't you be searching for the Davis brothers?" Hayes's hand drifted toward his gun, but he seemed to think better of it. "Fine. We'll head back to Prescott and send word to Thompson that his daughter's alive and continuing to Tucson." He fixed Xander with a hard stare. "Just remember, Grayson, if anything happens to her between here and there, you'll answer to me." "I'll keep that in mind," Xander replied evenly. The sheriff and his deputies departed shortly after, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Willa sank onto the bench, the brief confrontation having drained what little strength she had regained. "I apologize for involving you in my family difficulties," she said to Xander. "No need for apologies," he assured her. "Though your father sounds like a man used to getting his way." "You have no idea," Willa sighed. "Once he learns I'm continuing to Tucson instead of returning home, he'll likely send more men after us." "Let him," Xander said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "We have more immediate concerns." The Davis brothers are still out there, and now they'll know their plan failed. Herbert nodded grimly. They won't take kindly to that. They're likely to come after both of you now. Willa looked up at Xander, her expression resolute despite her fear. I won't blame you if you decide this is more trouble than you bargained for. Xander found himself smiling at her spirit. Miss Thompson, Willa, I've never been one to walk away from trouble, especially when it involves helping someone who deserves it. The next 2 days passed in relative peace at the trading post. Willa grew stronger under Martha's care, gradually regaining her strength and recovering from her ordeal in the desert. Xander used the time to prepare for their journey, purchasing additional supplies and checking over their route to Tucson. On the evening of the second day, they sat together on the porch after supper, watching the spectacular sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Willa had been quiet throughout the meal, lost in thought. We should be able to leave tomorrow, Xander said, breaking the comfortable silence. If you're feeling up to it. Willa nodded, her gaze still on the distant horizon. I am. Mrs. Wilson says I'm healing remarkably well. She turned to look at him directly. Xander, there's something I need to tell you. The seriousness in her tone made him sit up straighter. What is it? I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my situation, she began, twisting her hands in her lap. My father didn't just arrange a marriage for me. He practically sold me to settle a business debt. Xander's expression darkened. What do you mean? The man I'm supposed to marry, Victor Holloway, is 30 years my senior and has buried 2 wives already, Willa explained, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. He loaned my father a substantial amount of money when the bank was struggling last year. My hand in marriage was part of the repayment. That's barbaric, Xander said flatly. It's business, according to my father, Willa replied bitterly. I was raised to be an obedient daughter, to understand that my duty was to further the family interests. Until recently, I never questioned it. She looked down at her hands. It took nearly dying in the desert to make me realize I want more from life than being a man's possession. What will you do? Xander asked gently. My aunt in Tucson, my mother's sister, has always encouraged me to think for myself. She married for love against her family's wishes and has never regretted it. Willa's voice grew stronger. I'm hoping she'll help me find a way to support myself, to live independently. Xander could hear the determination in her voice, but also recognized the naivety. A woman alone in the Arizona territory faced countless challenges and dangers, but he admired her courage. It won't be easy, he warned her. But if that's what you want, I'll help however I can. Willa smiled at him, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Thank you. Coming from someone like you, that means a great deal. Someone like me, he echoed, raising an eyebrow. Someone who understands what it means to forge your own path, she clarified. Someone who doesn't let others dictate their life. Xander wasn't sure he deserved such praise, but before he could respond, Herbert emerged from the trading post, his expression grave. Rider coming fast from the south, he announced. Just one pushing his horse hard. They all moved to the edge of the porch, peering into the gathering darkness. A lone horseman was indeed approaching at a gallop, his mount kicking up dust that glowed orange in the last light of sunset. Could be a trap, Xander said, his hand moving to his revolver. Davis brothers might have sent someone ahead. Herbert raised his shotgun. Whoever it is, they're in an almighty hurry. As the rider drew closer, they could see it was a young man, barely more than a boy. He reined in his exhausted horse sharply in front of the trading post. Mr. Wilson, he called out, recognizing the trader, Davis brothers are coming. They've got a dozen men with them, heading this way from Wickenburg. Said they're looking for the Thompson girl and the man who helped her. Willa paled, instinctively moving closer to Xander. Herbert stepped forward, lowering his shotgun slightly. "When boy, how long do we have?" "Tomorrow morning, likely," the young rider gasped. "They stopped in town to get liquored up first. I slipped away to warn you. They're planning to burn this place to the ground." Herbert's face hardened. "You did right, Timmy. Get inside now, get some water." As the young man dismounted, Herbert turned to Xander and Willa. "You two need to leave tonight. Right now. If you ride through the night, you might get enough of a head start. We can't leave you to face them alone," Willa protested. "Martha and I will be long gone before they arrive," Herbert assured her. "We've had to abandon this place before when Apache raiders came through. We know how to disappear into the desert." Xander didn't like the idea of fleeing, but he recognized the wisdom in Herbert's advice. Against a dozen armed men, the odds were too long, especially with Willa to protect. "Where will you go?" he asked the older man. "Best you don't know," Herbert replied grimly. "Just in case they catch up to you." Within the hour, they were ready to depart. Martha had packed food and additional water for their journey, while Herbert provided Xander with extra ammunition and a detailed map showing water sources along the route to Tucson. "Take the eastern trail," Herbert advised as Xander helped Willa onto a sturdy mare they'd purchased from the Wilsons. "It's longer but follows the creek for a good stretch. You'll need the water, and it's harder to track someone along the stream bed." Xander nodded, mounting thunder. "We're in your debt." Herbert waved away his thanks. "Just get that girl to safety, and if you ever cross paths with the Davis brothers again." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Willa leaned down from her saddle to clasp Martha's hand. "Thank you for everything. I'll never forget your kindness." "God go with you both," Martha said softly, stepping back as they prepared to ride out. The night was clear, a half moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Xander led the way, setting a steady pace that wouldn't exhaust their horses but would put as much distance as possible between them and the trading post by dawn. Willa rode beside him in silence for the first hour, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. "This is all my fault. The Wilsons losing their home, you being hunted, all because of my father's business dealings." "You're not responsible for your father's actions," Xander said firmly, "or for the Davis brothers' choice to seek revenge. Still, you wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't stopped to help me in the desert," she pointed out. Xander glanced at her, her profile illuminated by moonlight. "I don't regret that decision for a moment." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and drink some water. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn glow when they reached the creek Herbert had mentioned. They followed its winding course southward, the sound of running water a welcome change from the silent desert. "We should rest here for a bit," Xander suggested as they reached a small grove of cottonwood trees near the creek. "The horses need it, and so do you." Willa didn't argue, her exhaustion evident in the droop of her shoulders. They dismounted in the shelter of the trees, tethering the horses where they could drink from the creek and graze on the sparse vegetation. "Try to get some sleep," Xander said, spreading a blanket for her in the shade. "I'll keep watch. Wake me in 2 hours," Willa insisted. "You need rest too." Xander nodded, though he had no intention of sleeping. The Davis brothers and their men might be delayed at the trading post, but they would eventually pick up their trail. Every moment of rest had to be balanced against the need to keep moving toward Tucson. While Willa slept, Xander scouted the area around their temporary camp, assessing possible escape routes and defensible positions. The terrain offered little protection, mostly open desert with scattered vegetation and the occasional dry wash. If they were caught in the open by a large group of armed men, their chances would be slim. He returned to camp to find Willa awake, washing her face in the creek. She looked up as he approached, pushing her damp hair back from her forehead. "I thought I told you to wake me," she said, noticing the position of the sun. "You needed the rest," Xander replied, kneeling to refill their canteens. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she admitted. "Though I never imagined I'd be fleeing for my life through the desert twice in 1 week." Despite the gravity of their situation, Xander couldn't help but smile at her dry humor. "It's not the usual way to see the Arizona territory." "No, I imagine the guidebooks recommend a more leisurely pace." She paused, studying his face. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" "I'll rest when we reach Tucson," he deflected, standing and offering her a hand up. "We should get moving. We've still got a long way to go." They continued south along the creek for several more hours before the watercourse bent eastward, away from their route. Reluctantly, they left its shelter, heading out across more exposed terrain toward a range of low hills that marked the halfway point to Tucson. The day grew progressively hotter, the sun beating down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. Xander kept a vigilant watch behind them, scanning the horizon frequently for any sign of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the foothills, where patches of shade offered some relief from the heat. As they navigated a narrow pass between two rocky slopes, Xander suddenly held up his hand, signaling Willa to stop. He cocked his head, listening intently. "What is it?" she whispered, immediately alert to the tension in his posture. "Horses," he said quietly. "More than 2. Coming from behind us." Willa's eyes widened with alarm. "The Davis brothers could be," Xander acknowledged grimly. "Or someone else. Either way, we need to find cover." He led them off the trail into a cluster of boulders, helping Willa dismount and guiding both horses behind the largest rock formation. They crouched low, Xander drawing his rifle from its saddle holster and checking that it was loaded. "If it comes to shooting, I want you to take the horses and ride east along the base of these hills," he instructed in a low voice. "There's a mission settlement about 15 miles that way. Ask for sanctuary." "I'm not leaving you," Willa protested. "This isn't a debate," Xander said firmly. "I promised to get you safely to Tucson, and I mean to keep that promise one way or another." Before she could argue further, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. Xander peered cautiously around the edge of the boulder. 4 riders were coming up the trail, moving at an unhurried pace. Even at a distance, he could see they were well armed. "It's them," Willa whispered. "Can't tell yet," Xander replied, gripping his rifle tighter. "But they're following our trail." As the riders drew closer, their voices became audible, rough, angry voices punctuated by coarse laughter. Xander strained to hear what they were saying. "Can't have gotten far with a half-dead woman slowing him down," one man was saying. "Pritchard figured they'd head for Tucson." "Cole wants the girl alive," another voice responded. "Said we can do what we want with the man who took her, but she belongs to him." "Cole Davis always did have a soft spot for Willa Thompson's daughter," a third man commented with a snicker. "Even before her daddy foreclosed on their ranch." Xander felt Willa stiffen beside him. He glanced at her questioningly. "Cole Davis courted me 2 years ago," she whispered, her face pale with realization. "My father refused him permission, said the Davis family wasn't good enough." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. This wasn't just about revenge for a foreclosure, it was personal for at least one of the Davis brothers. That made the situation even more dangerous. The riders were now barely 30 yards away. Xander could see them clearly, 4 rough-looking men, dust-covered and armed with rifles and pistols. At their current pace, they would pass within feet of the boulders where he and Willa were hiding. "Get ready to move if I tell you to," he murmured, shifting into a better position for a quick shot if needed. Just as the riders were about to pass their hiding place, one of the horses snorted and stamped, catching the scent of Xander and Willa's mounts. The lead rider pulled up sharply. "What is it, Hank?" one of the others asked. The first man gestured for silence, scanning the rocky terrain around them. "Horses nearby," he said quietly. "Fresh scent." The four men spread out, rifles raised, examining the area with increasing suspicion. One began moving directly toward the boulder where Xander and Willa were concealed. Xander made a split-second decision. "Run," he whispered to Willa. "Now, take Thunder and go." Before she could respond, he rose from behind the boulder and fired a warning shot into the air. The unexpected gunfire caused momentary confusion among the riders, their horses rearing in alarm. "Willa, go!" Xander shouted, firing again, this time aiming at the ground near the men's horses. In the chaos, Willa scrambled onto Thunder's back, her eyes wide with fear but her movements decisive. She hesitated just long enough to meet Xander's gaze, a world of unspoken words passing between them, before spurring the horse eastward along the base of the hills. Xander provided covering fire, forcing the men to take cover and giving Willa precious seconds to put distance between herself and danger. Two of the riders tried to give chase immediately, but Xander's well-placed shots kept them pinned down. "It's that ranger," one of the men shouted. "The one who found the Thompson girl. Take him alive," another ordered. "Cole will want to deal with him personally." Xander had no intention of being taken alive. He continued firing strategically, not trying to hit the men but making it impossible for them to mount an organized pursuit of Willa. He knew Thunder was fast and strong enough to outrun their horses, especially with Willa's slight weight. The skirmish lasted only minutes before Xander's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and drew his revolver, retreating deeper into the rocks. The four men advanced cautiously, spreading out to surround him. "Give it up, Ranger," the leader called out. "There's nowhere to go." Xander didn't bother correcting the man's assumption that he was already a ranger. Instead, he waited until one of the pursuers moved into view, then fired, grazing the man's arm. The wounded man yelped in pain, dropping back behind cover. "Next one won't be a graze," Xander warned. "You're outnumbered 4-1, another voice responded. "And we've got all day. The girl won't get far on her own." Xander grimaced. They were right about the odds but wrong about Willa. She was tougher than she looked, and Thunder was the fastest horse he'd ever owned. If anyone could reach safety, it was her. He needed to buy her more time. Moving carefully from boulder to boulder, he worked his way higher up the rocky slope, trying to reach a position that would give him a better vantage point. One of the men spotted his movement and fired, the bullet chipping stone inches from Xander's head. The exchange of gunfire continued sporadically for nearly an hour, with Xander gradually retreating higher into the rocks, while the four men tried to close in without exposing themselves to his increasingly accurate shots. He'd managed to wound two of them, but his ammunition was running dangerously low. The sun was beginning to set when Xander heard one of the men call out to the others. "Riders coming! From the east!" Xander risked a glance in that direction and saw a cloud of dust approaching rapidly, at least a dozen horsemen riding hard toward their position. His heart sank. If those were more of the Davis brothers' men, his chances of survival had just dropped from slim to none. But as the riders drew closer, he could make out something unexpected. Several of them wore the distinctive hats and badges of the Arizona Rangers. Leading them was a familiar figure on a familiar horse. Willa, astride Thunder, guiding the Rangers directly to the standoff. The Davis brothers' men saw the approaching force and quickly calculated their odds. Without a word, they broke cover and ran for their horses, abandoning the fight in favor of escape. They didn't get far. The Rangers intercepted them before they could reach open desert, surrounding the 4 men with leveled rifles. Xander emerged cautiously from his rocky shelter, his revolver still ready. Willa spotted him and urged Thunder forward, breaking away from the Rangers to reach him. She dismounted in a rush, nearly falling in her haste. "Xander, are you hurt?" she asked breathlessly, her eyes searching him for injuries. "I'm fine," he assured her, holstering his weapon. "A few scratches from flying rock splinters, nothing more." He looked past her to the Rangers who were now securing the 4 captured men. "How did you find them so quickly?" "I didn't go east," Willa admitted, looking simultaneously guilty and proud. "I circled around to the south instead, pushing Thunder as hard as I dared. We intercepted a Ranger patrol less than 5 miles from here. They were already searching for the Davis brothers based on the sheriff's reports." Xander shook his head in amazement. "That was incredibly risky." "So was staying behind to face 4 armed men alone," she countered. "I wasn't about to leave you to die while I ran for safety." Before Xander could respond, one of the Rangers approached them, a tall man with a weathered face and the bearing of someone used to authority. "Xander Grayson?" he inquired. Xander nodded. "That's right." "Captain James Reeves, Arizona Rangers," the man introduced himself. "Miss Thompson here says you're on your way to Tucson to join our ranks." "Yes, sir," Xander confirmed. Reeves looked him up and down appraisingly. "She also says you held off 4 of the Davis gang single-handedly to give her time to escape." "That true? She's exaggerating my part," Xander said modestly. "I just created a distraction." "For over an hour against 4 armed men," Willa interjected. "Without his actions, I never would have reached your patrol in time." Reeves's stern expression softened slightly. "Well, Mr. Grayson, it seems you've had your first taste of Ranger work before even being sworn in." He extended his hand. "I look forward to having you in our company." Xander shook the captain's hand, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you, sir. We'll escort you both to Tucson," Reeves continued. "These 4 will face justice for their part in Miss Thompson's kidnapping, but we still need to locate the Davis brothers themselves." "What about the Wilsons?" Willa asked anxiously. "The trading post. We sent a detachment there when we got word of the trouble," Reeves assured her. "Found it abandoned, but no sign of violence. Your friends had the good sense to clear out in time." Relief washed over both Xander and Willa. The Wilsons had escaped the Davis brothers' vengeance. They made camp that night with the Ranger patrol, the captured men securely bound and guarded. After a simple meal around the campfire, Captain Reeves pulled Xander aside for a private conversation. "Miss Thompson told me about your background," the captain said without preamble. "Former scout, ranch hand miner." "What she didn't mention, and what I'm guessing she doesn't know, is that you rode with Jake Slater's gang for nearly a year back in '75. Xander's blood ran cold. He'd hoped that part of his past was buried deep enough that it wouldn't follow him to Arizona. "How did you— It's my job to know who I'm bringing into the Rangers," Reeves interrupted. "Slater's gang robbed 3 banks and a train before they were caught. You were the only one who wasn't captured or killed." "I left before the train robbery," Xander said quietly. "I wanted no part in what Slater was planning. Too many innocent people would get hurt." Reeves studied him for a long moment. "I believe you. Your actions today speak to your character more than your past mistakes." He paused. "But if you join the Rangers, there can be no more secrets. You'll need to make a clean breast of it, face any consequences that might come." "I understand," Xander replied, relief mingling with apprehension. "I'm ready to do that." "Good," Reeves nodded. "Because that young woman over there," he gestured toward Willa, who was sitting by the fire, "looks at you like you hung the moon. I'd hate to see her disappointed." Xander glanced at Willa, catching her eye across the campsite. She smiled at him, a smile that contained more warmth than the desert sun. "So would I," he admitted. The journey to Tucson took 2 more days, during which Xander and Willa rarely left each other's side. They talked for hours as they wrote about their pasts, their hopes for the future, and the growing connection between them that neither could deny. By the time they reached Tucson, Xander had made his decision. The evening after their arrival, as they walked together in the garden of Willa's aunt's home, he told her everything about his past, including the year he'd spent riding with Slater's gang. "I was young, angry, and reckless after losing the farm," he explained, watching her face carefully for signs of disgust or disappointment. "Slater offered easy money and a sense of belonging. By the time I realized what kind of man he truly was, I was in too deep. What made you leave?" Willa asked quietly. Slater wanted to rob a train carrying a payroll. His plan involved derailing it in a canyon. Xander's jaw tightened at the memory. There would have been dozens of innocent passengers killed. I couldn't be part of that. "So you walked away," Willa said. "I tried to warn the authorities anonymously, but they didn't believe me," Xander continued. "The robbery still happened. Though the train wasn't derailed, they boarded it instead. 2 guards and a passenger were killed. I've carried that guilt ever since." Willa was silent for a long moment, processing what he'd told her. Finally, she took his hand in hers. "Thank you for telling me the truth. It couldn't have been easy." "I want to start fresh with the Rangers," Xander said. "No more running from my past. Captain Reeves says I'll likely face some kind of sanction for my time with Slater, but he believes I can still earn my place in the Rangers afterward." "And what about us?" Willa asked softly. "Where do I fit into this fresh start of yours?" Xander turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Willa, when I found you in that desert, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. These past days with you have shown me what I want my future to be." "And what is that?" she prompted, her green eyes searching his face. "A future with purpose, with honor. With you if you'll have me." He squeezed her hands gently. "I know it's soon, and I know your father might have other plans for you, but..." Willa silenced him with a finger to his lips. "My father's plans for me no longer matter. The woman who was obediently following his dictates died in that desert. The woman you saved wants to make her own choices." She smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "And I choose you, Xander Grayson." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, the beginning of something both knew would grow stronger with time. When they parted, Xander rested his forehead against hers, a sense of peace settling over him that he hadn't felt in years. "Your aunt seems to approve of me," he noted with a smile. "Though I suspect your father will be a harder sell." "My father will have to accept that I'm not a business asset to be traded away," Willa said firmly. "Besides, once you're officially a Ranger, even he will have to acknowledge you're a man of honor." True to Willa's prediction, William Thompson arrived in Tucson 3 days later, having received word of his daughter's rescue. He was a formidable man, tall, imposing, with the same green eyes as his daughter but none of her warmth. His greeting to Willa was stiff, formal, tinged with relief but also disapproval. "You should have returned to Phoenix immediately," he admonished her. "Victor Holloway has been beside himself with worry." "I doubt that very much, Father," Willa replied calmly. "Mr. Holloway hardly knows me, let alone cares for me." Thompson's frown deepened. "Your arrangement with Victor is terminated," Willa interrupted. "I will not marry him now or ever." The banker's face reddened with anger. "You have no say in the matter. The agreement is signed, the announcement has been made. Your willfulness has already caused enough trouble." "My willfulness," Willa echoed incredulously. I was kidnapped and left to die because of your business practices, father, not because of any action of mine. If you had been where you were supposed to be, under proper escort, she would likely still have been taken, Xander interjected, stepping into the room. He had been waiting outside, giving Willa space for a private reunion with her father, but the raised voices had drawn him in. The Davis brothers were determined to have their revenge. Thompson turned to Xander, looking him up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "And you are, Xander Grayson," he replied, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. "I found your daughter in the desert and helped bring her to safety." "Ah, yes, the wandering cowboy turned hero." Thompson's tone made it clear what he thought of such a man. "I'm told the Rangers have offered you a position despite your colorful past." Xander tensed but kept his composure. News travels fast. "I make it my business to know who my daughter associates with," Thompson replied coldly. "A man who once rode with outlaws is hardly suitable company for her." "Father, stop," Willa said, moving to stand beside Xander. "Xander has been nothing but honorable. He risked his life repeatedly to protect me, for which I'm prepared to offer appropriate compensation," Thompson said dismissively. "But his service to our family is now concluded." "I don't want your money, Mr. Thompson," Xander said evenly. "And with all due respect, only your daughter decides when my service to her is concluded." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "I see, so that's how it is." He turned back to Willa. "You imagine yourself in love with this Ranger after a few days of high adventure. It's a childish infatuation that will pass." "It's not infatuation, father," Willa replied with quiet certainty. "I love Xander, and I intend to build a life with him." "Then you do so without my blessing or my support," Thompson snapped. "If you choose him over your family obligations, you choose to forfeit your inheritance, your position in society, everything." "If that's your decision, I accept it," Willa said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "But I hope someday you'll recognize that my happiness is worth more than any business arrangement." Thompson stared at his daughter for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but acknowledging the strength he saw in her. "You are more like your mother than I realized," he finally said. "She was equally stubborn when her mind was made up." He turned to Xander. "If you truly care for my daughter, Mr. Grayson, prove it by becoming a man worthy of her." With that, he departed, leaving Willa and Xander standing together in the quiet room. "Are you all right?" Xander asked softly, taking her hand. Willa nodded, squeezing his fingers. "I knew he wouldn't understand, at least not right away, but he mentioned my mother. He never does that." She looked up at Xander with hope in her eyes. "Perhaps, in time, he'll come around." Xander pulled her into a gentle embrace. "If he's half as smart as his daughter, he will." In the weeks that followed, Xander was officially inducted into the Arizona Rangers, after a thorough review of his past and a period of probation. His skills as a tracker and his courage during Willa's rescue had impressed Captain Reeves enough to override concerns about his former association with Slater's gang. The Davis brothers were eventually captured trying to cross into Mexico. They faced trial for kidnapping, attempted murder, and various other charges. Cole Davis, when confronted by Willa in court, showed no remorse for his actions, claiming that her father's foreclosure had justified his vengeance. "Your father took everything from us," he snarled across the courtroom. "Our land, our livelihood, my brother's life. You were lucky that Ranger found you when he did." "No, Mr. Davis," Willa replied calmly. "Luck had nothing to do with it. But while you chose hatred and revenge, I've chosen to build something new from what happened. I hope someday you find peace with your choices, as I have with mine." Her words carried no anger, only compassion, a compassion that baffled Cole Davis but impressed the judge and jury. The Davis brothers received lengthy prison sentences, ensuring they would no longer pose a threat to Willa or anyone else. With the trial behind them, Willa and Xander began building their life together in earnest. They were married in a simple ceremony in Tucson, with Captain Reeves standing as Xander's best man and Willa's aunt giving her away. William Thompson did not attend, but he sent a small wooden chest containing her mother's jewelry, a tacit acknowledgement, if not quite a blessing. Xander's duties with the Rangers took him away from home periodically, but he always returned to Willa, their reunion sweetened by the separation. They purchased a small ranch outside Tucson, where Xander raised horses when not on patrol, and Willa established a school for the children of nearby ranchers and farmers. Their first child, a son they named James Herbert Grayson, arrived a year after their marriage, a strong, healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet determination. Willa's father finally relented enough to visit his grandson, the first step in a slow reconciliation between father and daughter. "He has the Thompson look about him," William observed, holding the infant with unexpected tenderness. "Your mother would have been proud. Of the child or of me?" Willa asked softly. Her father met her gaze, something like regret in his eyes. "Both. She always believed in following one's heart. I forgot that lesson after losing her." 2 years later, their family expanded again with the birth of twin daughters, Martha and Elizabeth. By then, Xander had been promoted to sergeant within the Rangers, his past fully redeemed by his service and integrity. On the 5th anniversary of the day Xander found Willa in the desert, they stood together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson, much as it had been on that fateful day. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Willa asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they watched their children playing in the yard. "Every day," Xander admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. "If I hadn't decided to take that shortcut through the desert. Or if the Vultures had found me first," Willa added softly. Xander turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his hand. "But they didn't. And every day since then has been a gift I never expected to receive. When you cut those ropes and gave me water, you saved more than my life," Willa said, covering his hand with hers. "You saved me from a future without love, without purpose. You gave me the courage to choose my own path." "You always had that courage," Xander corrected her gently. "You just needed someone to believe in it as much as I do." As the light faded from the sky and their children came running to be swept up in loving arms, both Xander and Willa knew that the true miracle wasn't just survival against impossible odds, but the life they had built together from those desperate beginnings, a life rich with purpose, commitment, and a love that had been forged in the harshest of circumstances, only to emerge stronger for the trial. The desert that had nearly claimed Willa's life now surrounded their home, a constant reminder not of death, narrowly avoided, but of the beauty that could bloom in even the most unforgiving places when nourished by devotion and hope. Years passed, and their ranch prospered, becoming a haven not just for their growing family but for travelers and those in need. Xander continued his work with the Rangers until a bullet taken during the pursuit of cattle rustlers left him with a permanent limp. He retired with honors, focusing instead on breeding the finest horses in the territory. Willa's school grew into a proper academy, educating not just the children of ranchers but also those from the local Apache tribes, whose culture and knowledge she insisted be respected and preserved. Her work earned her recognition beyond Arizona, and she was eventually appointed to the Territorial Education Commission, where she advocated for equal educational opportunities for all children, regardless of background. William Thompson mellowed considerably in his old age, becoming a doting grandfather who visited regularly. He never explicitly admitted he had been wrong about Xander, but his actions spoke volumes, from providing capital for expanding the ranch to publicly acknowledging Xander as his son-in-law and business partner in a new venture. The first bank in Arizona to offer loans specifically to small ranchers and farmers at fair rates. "Your mother would approve," he told Willa during one visit, watching Xander teaching young James to ride. "She always said the measure of wealth wasn't in dollars but in the lives you touched. Is that why you're helping us establish the loan program?" Willa asked, curious about this new side of her father. Thompson looked slightly embarrassed. "Partly. And partly because your husband made me see that foreclosing on the Davis Ranch didn't just cost me nearly losing you. It cost the territory good, hard-working people who might have contributed much if given a fair chance." The Davis brothers eventually served their sentences and were released, but they never returned to Arizona. Word reached Tucson that Cole had headed to California, while his younger brother had gone north to Montana. Xander kept a watchful eye out for several years, but the promised revenge never materialized. "Sometimes," he told Willa on the 10th anniversary of her rescue, "people actually learn from their mistakes. Like a certain former outlaw I know." She teased, her eyes still as bright and loving as they had been on their wedding day. "Exactly like him," Xander agreed, pulling her close for a kiss that still held all the passion of their first embrace. Their family continued to grow, not just with the addition of a fourth child, another son they named William Xavier after both their fathers, but with the many young rangers Xander mentored and the countless students who passed through Willa's academy. Many of those students went on to become teachers themselves, spreading Willa's philosophy of education throughout the territory. The story of how they met became something of a legend in Arizona, embellished over time as such stories often are, with the number of villains increasing and the perils growing more dramatic with each retelling. Xander and Willa never bothered to correct these exaggerations, amused by how their personal history had become part of the territory's folklore. "Let them tell it however they like," Willa said when a newspaper article particularly exaggerated Xander's heroics. "The truth is between us." And the truth was more remarkable than any embellished tale. A man with a troubled past finding redemption through an act of kindness. A woman raised to be obedient finding the courage to forge her own destiny. Two souls connecting in the most unlikely of circumstances and building a love strong enough to weather any storm. As they grew older, watching their children establish their own families and carrying on their legacies of service and compassion, both Xander and Willa reflected often on that fateful day in the desert, not with fear or regret, but with profound gratitude. What had begun as a simple act of human decency had blossomed into a lifetime of love, purpose, and joy. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken the main road that day instead of the shortcut?" Willa asked Xander one evening as they sat on their porch, now gray-haired but still very much in love, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their children had once romped. Xander smiled, taking her hand in his, the same hands that had once cut her free from those deadly ropes. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some people are just meant to be together. Even a banker's rebellious daughter and a reformed outlaw," she asked with a smile. "Especially them," he replied, kissing her softly. "Some loves are written in the stars, Willa. Ours just happened to be written in the desert sand." And as the sun set once more over the Arizona landscape, they both had come to cherish They knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every challenge they had faced had been worth it for the life they had built together, a life that had begun in the most desperate of circumstances, but had flourished into something beautiful, enduring, and true. The vultures that had once circled overhead, anticipating death, had long since been replaced by the eagles that soared above their ranch, symbols not of endings, but of freedom, strength, and the boundless possibilities that open up when courage and love combine to overcome even the harshest of fates.